Hey everyone, welcome to the Evangelist Nick Garrett channel. Today the Crusaders take Nicaea, face Qilij Arslan in the Battle of Dorylaeum, and Baldwin Godfrey of Bohemund's younger brother takes the county of Edessa. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of the action. Be right back. Crusader action in the Holy Land began when in May of 1097 AD, the Crusaders laid siege to the famous Christian town Nicaea. Nicaea was the gateway to Anatolia from the west, and was the acting capital of Qilij Arslan, the Sultan of Rûm, and the Seljuq Turks. The Seljuq Turks were a group of Asian Tartars that came west into Persia during the 11th century. They claimed all the land originally taken by Mohammedans was rightfully theirs. There was probably a great deal of truth in that statement. This fact led to an extremely violent quarter century in and around Jerusalem prior to the time of the Crusade. The Seljuq Turks were so effective in dominating the region that they rose to power quickly. In an indirect way, the Seljuq were good for the Europeans because they, at least for a time, quelled the westward move of local uprisings and Mongols in the region as well. They were fierce, strong, and abided by the most rigid and militant tenets of Islam. They were so impressive that the Caliph of Baghdad gave prominent roles in the leadership to their top men, probably out of fear and the hope that by doing so they would not be overthrown. Put simply, the Christian Crusaders were by no means the first group of fighters in the most complicated region in the world. Nicaea was a smart location for the Europeans to begin a serious crusade. It was just across the Bosporus from Constantinople. It gave a base and staging area for Crusaders laying siege to Nicaea, and once taken, the bulk of the staging could be moved to Nicaea. The city also gave a strong town in Asia Minor with which to plan military conquests through the rest of the Holy Land, and ultimately, Jerusalem. If Qilij Arslan was aware of the sanctioned Crusader force, he had every reason to think they were no threat. Peter the Hermit and Emiko of Lenin's leftover civilian force had been no match for trained Muslim Seljuks. They were massacred near Nicaea on October 21st of the previous year. When word came to Arslan that the Crusaders were at Nicaea, he was fighting back threats in the east. A tribe called the Danishmends. The Danishmends had reportedly been, quote, deliberately stirred up by the Byzantines to distract the Seljukids, end quote. By the time Arslan returned to attack the Crusaders besieging Nicaea, it was too late. The Crusaders had soundly and efficiently retaken Nicaea for the Christians and were now on the inside. In fact, they finally succeeded when the Byzantines sent ships overland and floated them on the lake approaches to the city that Nicaea finally fell to the Byzantine admiral Boudamides. Have historians looked too harshly on Alexios I Komnenos' hesitancy to take the field himself at the head of a force? Is it possible some early Byzantine collaboration was overlooked by later Western sources? The emperor did eventually take the field himself. Alexios came and negotiated the return of the city to Byzantium to great fanfare. So far, so good. This had worked precisely as intended and gave the Christians the momentum they needed to make a go of it in the strange arid land much different from Western Europe. Thus the home of major Christian councils, and the place where Constantine himself had first gathered the bishops in 325 AD, was once again in the safe hands of Christians. Likely inspired by their easy victory, the Crusaders began moving across the brutally hot and unforgiving land of Anatolia. Qilij Arslan had scorched earth in his flight from Nicaea, hoping to affect the ability of the Crusaders to find food, water, and plunder along the way. He burned crops and destroyed everything he and his men could not take with them. Luckily, the Crusaders had spaced their army into 2 large units, one well ahead of the other. Undoubtedly, this eased the demand on what little resources the Crusaders were able to find as they marched through Anatolia, which again wasn't much. Bohemund of Taranto, the head of the strong and talented Norman contingent, touched base with spies, who returned and informed him that the Sultan lay ahead to surprise them. A battle ensued at the Anatolian town called Dorylaeum, between the Crusaders and the forces of Qilij Arslan. Things quickly went bad for the Christians. They were not used to tactics like this. Fast horses and slashing crescent-shaped swords. Hit-and-run tactics gone as quickly as they arrived. Yet with each arrival, Crusaders would notice several more brothers fallen. Something had to be done, and quickly. In an act of military prowess that would be repeated time and again, Bohemund proved the calm and calculated leader so crucial to the success of the First Crusade. He passed on orders quickly and maneuvered his body of Crusaders. They abandoned their first tactic and ran for a new position, ordering his knights to dismount and form a shield wall. Cavalry intermixed with infantry around the camp. This forced the Turks to have to come in close, still on horseback, with their hit-and-run strategy. Now the Turks were being decisively picked off, and the battle continued that way through the rest of the afternoon. Meanwhile, the women and civilians in the camp were able to freely move about the middle of what may have resembled the Roman phalanx, giving water and respite to the tightly packed soldiers. The second unit of the Crusader army that had been set back and behind Bohemund arrived just in the nick of time, smashing the Turks with their cavalry and running them from the field. Word spread about the Battle of Dorylaeum, which showed Bohemund decisively as the most skilled commander. Word of his presence also spread fear throughout the region. There can be no doubt the presence of Crusaders spread both fear and hope throughout the Levant. The Turks even left behind the city of Iconium, presumably in their attempts to flee from Bohemund. Kilij hoped from that point forward to just avoid the Crusaders because any further decimation of his force left him powerless on his eastern Mongol front. The next 4 months were spent reclaiming Anatolia, little by little. A small reconnaissance force under Baldwin, Godfrey of Bouillon's youngest brother, and Tancred, the younger brother of Bohemund, set out and ahead of the main body. The small force was free to move and come and go about the main army. This proved to be beneficial. They established contacts with the local Armenian Christians in Cilicia. Just from speaking with them, Baldwin saw great opportunities for further Crusader gains. These contacts were in part responsible for helping the Crusaders see what was ahead of them and prepare as they moved into Syria. After having been out on expedition, Baldwin returned to the main body to find his wife sick and dying. She may have even died by the time Baldwin returned. One might presume there was little time to mourn properly in a Crusader caravan. Still, almost immediately, Baldwin approached his brother Godfrey with a bold plan. It's hard not to presume he had probably been thinking about it before returning to find his wife on her deathbed. Or that at least during the long hours on horseback, that the pieces of his plan were coming into sequence, and that later the death of his wife gave him every reason to go for it. Muslim historians have liked to point out that she represented Baldwin's only claim to title and wealth. So when she died, he would have needed to find other ways to establish his name and legacy. They claim that this fact compelled his next action, which Christian sources agree was immediate, while the sources disagreed about his motive. Baldwin had heard through his contacts that there were towns in Mesopotamia eager for protection from the Muslims, and that the Armenian kings were too old or weak to offer any real protection against attacks from inside or out. Baldwin sought to detach a small force and move on Edessa, a county in Mesopotamia, as protection to build up their presence and strength in the region. Godfrey, who had been selected as one of the leaders of the crusade, agreed to the plan as a benefit to the whole crusade campaign. The Muslim account of the event was biased against the actions of the Crusaders. First of all, Godfrey could have either told Baldwin no, or suggested someone to implement the plan other than him. Secondly, since councils of war were convened among crusade leaders on major military decisions, one has to assume the diplomatic or spiritually idealistic Adhemar of Lepuy or Raymond IV would have raised any opposition to Baldwin's plan if they had concerns. Time and again they stood stubbornly for protecting the oaths outlined between the Eastern and Western empires. Godfrey saw in Baldwin's plan the great benefit of a Frankish state, that it would provide for staging and supplies for the Crusaders. Most of all, there was no threat of violating the oath of loyalty that had been made with Emperor Alexios I Comnenus of Constantinople. The city in Baldwin's eyes was Edessa, which was in Mesopotamia, a neighboring country, not under Alexios' control. On October 17, 1097, the Crusaders implemented their plan. Baldwin detached from the main body with a small group of knights and headed for Mesopotamia. Baldwin immediately conquered 2 towns in the countryside. His victories so decisive and relieving for the inhabitants of Edessa that they generated notice and great gratitude. Not just the notice of the people of other towns, but also of Toros, the Armenian ruler of the capital city of Edessa. Toros could not protect his people from raids by the Turks, and his people were frustrated with him, viewing him as a desperate old man who meant well but had no real ability to protect them. With Baldwin in the area, someone that could protect them, Toros feared a coup. This fear was only exacerbated when he started hearing the buzz around Baldwin. His people were taken with this crusader stranger from the west. Toros acted quickly to protect his interest, seeking out Baldwin and making an alliance with him. Baldwin gladly accepted because it immediately placed him as second in command in the county. During the events of Baldwin of Bouillon's rise in Edessa, the main body of Crusader forces made it to the unforgiving deserts northwest of Antioch by foot, losing many men and horses to hunger, fatigue, and dehydration. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to talking to you next time when we see how the Crusaders fared in their siege of Antioch. And we also learn about a strange ritual that took place between Baldwin and Toros in the waters outside of Edessa. Please subscribe, and I look forward to talking to you next time.